The island of Madagascar is one of the most biodiverse places on Earth. Around 5% of the world's species live there, on less than 0.5% of the world's total landmass. The vast majority of those species are endemic. That means they're found only in Madagascar. And I'm not just talking about animals like lemurs or tomato frogs, it's the same for plants and fungi too, at least for the species that scientists have the data on anyway. For many years, experts have cited Madagascar's isolation as the cause of all this biological variety. But Madagascar is simply too diverse for just one reason to be behind it all. Instead, it appears the island's secret lies not just in its seclusion, but also in its geological past, including getting ripped off of not one, but 2 separate continents. Today, Madagascar is the 4th largest island in the world. With an area of 587,000 square kilometers, it's roughly on par with SciShow's home state of Montana, if Montana also ate its neighbor North Dakota. And across all those square kilometers, the island's got some pretty distinctive geography. It has steep cliffs stretching along its east coast, and mountains in the center and north of the island. Meanwhile, its western coast is flatter and more varied. Ultimately, all these landscapes are the product of a 170 million year-long game of geological ping pong. Madagascar currently sits about 400 kilometers off the east coast of Africa, but 200 million years ago, the island was a slice of land in the middle of the giant continent Gondwana, which also included Africa, India, Antarctica, and Australia. Then, during the mid-Jurassic, between 170 and 140 million years ago, Gondwana split apart. India, Australia, and Antarctica moved south together, taking Madagascar with them at the western edge of a new continent. This continent then experienced its own breakup during the early Cretaceous, taking both Australia and Antarctica out of our story for today. Fast forward to about 90 million years ago, deep down in Earth's mantle, a plume of hot material started to rise. This created a hot spot under the surface of Greater India, a bit like what's under Iceland now. Molten rock soon poured out of the crust and over the edge of the ancient continent, helping to open another ocean rift. This time, Madagascar was split from the Indian subcontinent and got left behind as the rest of the landmass wandered off to crash into the rest of Asia. In both of these rifting events, Madagascar was basically an inactive spectator, a chunk of land getting pushed out of the way as a new ocean basin formed. For explaining Madagascar's extreme biodiversity, that's actually a bit annoying. Biological diversity is often higher in tectonically dramatic settings, like where mountains are forming. Madagascar doesn't fit that picture. And yet, that pair of massive geological upheavals, and the many lesser processes that followed each of them, did help shape the island's inhabitants in some critical ways. Let's start with those 2 major rifting events. A rift starts when tectonic forces, like the turning of the mantle or the tug of distant subducting tectonic plates, stretch one piece of crust in opposite directions. The top layer of that crust is relatively cold, solid rock, so the main way it accommodates that stretching is by breaking, not unlike how I react to excessive stress. All this breakage results in a series of steep faults or fractures between separate blocks of rock, which slide huge chunks of rock in all directions, sideways, up, and down. On a large scale, this faulting makes the crust at the center of a rift thinner. This is why geologists often talk about rift valleys. When the crust becomes thin like this, hot mantle material can flow upward to try and balance things out, but that ends up pushing on the sides of the rift too. So like a root pushing up through asphalt, the rifted valley sides each get tilted up and back, creating steep cliffs called escarpments, and gradually downward sloping plateaus behind them. And escarpments don't just change how a landscape looks, they also change how it works. The cliff edge becomes a sharp water divide, separating one drainage basin from another. A raindrop at the top of the cliff could find itself traveling along either the short, steep rivers down the face of the escarpment, or a longer, shallower path down the tilted plateau. Those steep rivers on the escarpment face have a ton of energy, which helps erode the cliff face and slowly move the whole escarpment away from the rift. It seems like this is what's been happening on Madagascar. But before we can continue, all science needs funding, so here's an ad.
If you made it this far into a SciShow video, you're probably the kind of person who loves engaging with new ideas and learning outside of a classroom. And that's what makes Brilliant so great too. For example, Brilliant can show you the fundamentals of building scalable software through their Programming with Functions course. It's a great course if you're familiar with variables, loops, and logic. And if you could use a refresher on that stuff, Brilliant has you covered. After all, Brilliant is made for everyone, from age 10 to 110. To learn for free on Brilliant for a full 30 days, go to brilliant.org/SciShow. Scan the QR code on screen or click on the link in the description. They're also giving you unlimited daily access to everything on Brilliant with 20% off an annual premium subscription.
In 2025, a team of researchers from Switzerland studied Madagascar's geomorphology in detail. They mapped all the river networks along with changes in elevation and developed a model to explain the strange combination of features. They concluded the first episode of rifting, the one that separated Madagascar from Africa, created an escarpment on the western side of the island. The resulting plateau behind the cliff sloped gradually down towards the east. The water divide was near to the new western shore, and the short, steep rivers that ran to the sea would have helped the escarpment creep eastward over millions of years. Then, when the island eventually rifted from India, the upheaval created another escarpment, this time on the island's eastern side. The plateau that had originally tilted east now tilted back towards the west, and the water divide jumped to the eastern shore. This basically reversed all of the rivers in Madagascar, and the westward flowing channels now crossed over the old escarpment. But these channels had steeper slopes than before, meaning any erosion they caused happened faster, so the river valleys expanded faster too. These reconfigured rivers and their basins then ate away at the old western escarpment until much of the original topography was lost. Today, all that's left is the occasional remnant bit of plateau left alone on a flattened plain. Meanwhile, the newer eastern escarpment is currently retreating in a much more orderly fashion, maintaining a straight, well-defined cliff edge as it inches away from the shore. But this isn't the end of Madagascar's story as a piece of rifting collateral damage. Somewhere between 30 and 60 million years ago, large-scale movements in Earth's mantle raised the north part of the island. And for the last 30 million years, parts of Africa have been slowly ripping the continent apart once again. The East African rift has been spreading southward, causing effects that ripple over to Madagascar. For example, it's made a pulse of volcanic activity and uplift that's created mountains like pimples in the center of the island, as well as chopped up parts of the central plateau into a mess of faults. All of this has enhanced the effect of river erosion, changing the topography as well as where the water divide sits. In fact, in the south of the island, the water divide is moving less than 200 meters per million years, but in the north, it's up to a breakneck 2.5 kilometers per million years. And next to the central volcano and active faults, it's closer to 4 kilometers per million years. And if you're wondering, no, that is still slower than your toenails grow. Probably. So what does all of this geologic history have to do with why the Eye exists, or the Avenue of Giant Baobab, or any of the island's non-photogenic endemic life forms? When Madagascar split away from Africa and then India, it would have taken its native flora and fauna with it. But the majority of these species, including any dinosaurs, were wiped out at the end of the Cretaceous, around 66 million years ago. It wasn't a complete fresh start, but it was pretty close. The island was soon recolonized by plant and animal immigrants who followed wind and water currents from India and Africa. And once they reached the island, they had to deal with an ever-evolving escarpment landscape. In 2024, researchers built a computer model to simulate how river erosion would change both Madagascar's landscape and plant habitats over time. In general, their simulated escarpment migrated away from the coast at a constant rate, but developed an irregular shape due to each river's drainage basin growing at a different rate. As a result, the habitat patches were dynamic, frequently changing their size, shape, appearing and disappearing, and fragmenting and merging. Unique isolated habitats would persist for a few million years at a time, which is exactly what evolution needs to create new species adapted to one specific place. For instance, water divides, steep cliffs, and large rivers are enough to separate lemurs, and when populations can't intermingle, their gene pools can each go their own evolutionary direction. This creates what's known as microendemism, where species evolve that are unique and specific to a much more local region than your general, say, island-level endemism. Together, these models of Madagascar's geological and ecological history help explain the island's high overall biodiversity and how this diversity differs so much across the island. Today, the low terrain along the western coast, created by the migration of the older western escarpment, is home to vast swaths of mangrove forests. Meanwhile, the central highlands islands are dominated by a mosaic of grasslands and woodlands, which vary locally along with the remnant escarpment landscape. And the more recent eastern escarpment plays a big role in shaping rainfall across the island, making it lush and humid in the east compared to the drier west. This escarpment, with its higher terrain and higher rainfall, is itself a hotspot for biodiversity. For example, out of the nearly 9,000 species of seed plants mapped across all of Madagascar, more than 70% of them live along or just below the eastern escarpment. There are also biodiversity differences along the length of the escarpment. In general, researchers have reported a higher diversity of plants, amphibians, reptiles, and lemurs in the northern part of the island compared to the south. This is thought to be linked to the faster escarpment retreat in the north caused by that extra uplift over 30 million years ago, which creates more habitat disruption. All that geologically recent volcanic and tectonic activity has helped shift the water divide too, yet another source of disruption. In fact, researchers have found evidence that species started diversifying faster starting around 40 to 30 million years ago. Looks like a pretty solid link to me, and to people with fancier science degrees getting paid to figure all this out. Escarpment landscapes and how they evolve help boost biodiversity around the world. But in Madagascar, the Earth has basically doubled down. It gave Madagascar 2, turning it into an island in the process. So the next time you pause to appreciate a picture of some weird Madagascan critter, think a bunch of rocks.